The morning Cecily Merton arrived at Thornfield Grange. She was carrying a valise that held everything she owned, and a letter that had promised rather less than it delivered. The letter was from a solicitor in the county of Derbyshire, informing her that her great-uncle Silas Merton had died in October and had named her sole heir to his estate. She had read the word estate in the way one reads a word that has been pressed beyond its natural weight. She had imagined a cottage, perhaps, with a vegetable garden and a reliable hearth. She had imagined 3 small rooms and a widow's portion of quiet. She had not imagined the iron gate she was now standing before, or the long gravel avenue behind it, or the house at the end of that avenue with its 12 windows facing the frost. She had certainly not imagined the man on the front steps. He was tall, and he stood in the way of men who have grown accustomed to being the largest fact in any given space. His coat was dark, his expression darker, and he was watching her approach with the attention one gives a problem that is taking too long to solve itself. The avenue was long enough that she had time to observe all of this, to feel the cold of the December morning settle further into her hands, and to understand, before she had reached the halfway point of the gravel, that arriving at Thornfield Grange was going to require more of her than she had packed. "Miss Merton," said Mr. Holt, the solicitor, emerging from behind the man's left shoulder in the manner of a man who has spent his professional life emerging from behind larger men's shoulders. "I am glad you have come. All is in order." "Nothing is in order," said the man on the steps. His voice was what she would have expected. Level, low, and about as accommodating as the stone beneath his boots. "Mr." Holt drew a careful breath. "Your Grace, we discussed this at considerable length." "You discussed," the Duke of Ashcroft said. "I listened." He turned his eyes to her then, fully, and the quality of his attention was something she did not have a name for. Not contempt, precisely. Something more careful than contempt. An assessment, rendered in a single look that moved from the valise in her right hand to her plain wool mantle, to the hem of her dress where the morning's damp had darkened it at the edge, to her face, where the look stopped and stayed rather longer than either of them had planned for. He looked away first. "Come inside," he said. "The steps are iced." It was not welcome. It was not warmth. It was the shortest path between a problem and its management, delivered with his back already turned. She stood a moment in the frost and let herself understand what she had walked into. The house was called Thornfield Grange, and it was old and solid and cold in the way that old solid houses are cold. A cold that lived in the stone rather than in the air. A cold that had outlasted every fire laid against it. Mr. Holt showed her the drawing room, the library, the kitchen passage, the stairs. He showed her the deed, signed and witnessed, bearing the unambiguous name of Silas Merton's one surviving Merton relation. He showed her the codicil, which was 2 pages long and contained the phrase outright and in perpetuity twice, as if old Silas had anticipated exactly this conversation and wished to be thorough. The Duke stood at the window through most of this. He did not look at her again. He looked at the gravel avenue and the bare linden trees beyond the gate, and his jaw had the quality of stone on a cold morning. When Mr. Holt had finished, the Duke spoke without turning. The estate was to be absorbed into Ashcroft upon Silas Merton's death. The arrangement was understood by all parties. "The codicil supersedes the arrangement," Mr. Holt said, in the gentle voice of a man who had said this several times already. "I am aware of what the codicil says." Cecily looked at the deed in her hands, at her own name in the solicitor's careful clerk hand, and thought of 3 rooms and a hearth, and of the cold already seeping through the window frame of this much larger room. "I will not be bought out," she said. Both men looked at her. the solicitor with something like relief, the Duke with that careful, measuring attention again, as if she had done something he had not expected, and was not yet certain whether it inconvenienced him or interested him. She did not let herself wonder which. If you have ever stood in a house that was promised to someone else and decided to stay, you know the particular quiet that followed. Stay close to Cecily's story. She had only just begun. The history of Cecily Merton's claim to Thornfield Grange was not romantic, and she would have been the first to say so. Her father, Gerald Merton, had been a younger son of a younger son, a pattern the English gentry had been perfecting for 2 centuries. He had died 2 years prior, leaving debts that his daughter had spent 18 months methodically extinguishing, 1/4 payment at a time from the salary of a lady's companion in Bath. The woman she had companioned was not unkind, merely old and erratic and fond of rearranging the furniture at 11 o'clock at night. And Cecily had learned in that year and a half to remain standing until she was told she might sit, to speak when spoken to and not before, and to fold herself into whatever shape the room required. Great-uncle Silas she had met exactly 3 times in her life. He had been a bachelor of 68, fond of claret and the natural history of birds, and he had looked at her on each occasion with the expression of a man surprised to find a person where he had expected an obligation. He had given her a shilling at Christmas when she was 9, a copy of Gilbert White's Selborne when she was 17, and Thornfield Grange when he was dead. She had no idea what she had done to earn the last, and she supposed she never would. She spent her first 3 days at the Grange, as she had always spent herself in unfamiliar houses. She learned where she was not wanted, and she made herself useful in the spaces that remained. The kitchen was cold and understaffed. She helped Agnes, the housekeeper, a compact woman of 50 with capable hands and the wary eyes of a person who has watched a great deal and is waiting to see whether any of it will change, to take an inventory of the pantry. The east wing had a leak above the yellow guest room. She found a bucket. The kitchen garden was entirely untended, which struck her as a solvable problem, which was how she had always preferred her problems. The Duke of Ashcroft did not depart. This was the thing she had not anticipated. She had assumed that once the deed's legitimacy was established, he would remove himself to his own estate, the great house of Ashcroft less than a mile to the north, and visible from Thornfield's upper windows on a clear morning, and administer his displeasure from a proper distance. He did not. He appeared instead in the Grange's library each morning by 9 o'clock, attending to the estate accounts with the focused industry of a man who had managed these books for 2 years and saw no reason to alter his habits for the presence of a new owner. He was impeccably civil. He was also implacable, and the civility had the quality of a door held open that was nonetheless clearly in the way. It was on the 4th morning that the Dowager Duchess arrived. Lady Harriet Vane was 60 years old, beautifully dressed, and carried her authority in the way certain women carry it. Not as something worn, but as something grown into the body so thoroughly that removing it would be a surgical procedure. She swept into the drawing-room with the ease of a woman entering a room that had always been hers, and was merely, temporarily, inconveniently, occupied by someone else. She embraced her son, examined the ceiling, and looked at Cecily with a bright, thorough expression that had nothing kind inside it. "So this is Silas Merton's cottage girl," she said to Miss Lydia Pemberton, who had arrived at her elbow in the manner of a satellite finding its orbit. It was a private aside, delivered behind the angle of Lady Harriet's fan and pitched at precisely the volume that carries across quiet rooms. Cecily continued unpacking the box of household ledgers she had been examining, and said nothing. "I understand you were a companion in Bath," Lady Harriet said, directly now, setting her gloves on the sideboard with the unhurried confidence of a woman who expects her gloves to stay where she puts them. Before this unexpected windfall. "I was," Cecily said. "How extraordinary that Silas chose to leave it to you." A small considered pause. "He was always rather eccentric, in his way. Edmund, the east wing will need to be repointed before spring. You can see the frost damage from the lane." Edmund. The Duke of Ashcroft looked up from his chair by the window for the first time that morning. He looked at his mother, and then at Cecily. And the look that moved between all three of them was wordless and perfectly legible, and resolved nothing. Lydia Pemberton smiled at Cecily with the specific warmth of a woman who has already won and is being gracious about it. The estate had a kitchen orchard, 20 apple trees running along the southern wall with their branches bare and crossed in the December light, and a path that connected it to the formal gardens left to their own devices for at minimum 3 seasons. Cecily had been exploring the property each morning before the Duke arrived at the library, on the principle that it is better to know one's ground than to be surprised by it. On the 7th morning, she was not quick enough. She had gone up to look at the orchard wall, where a section of old stone had separated at the mortar, and a limb from the nearest apple tree was pressing into the gap. She was close to the wall, one gloved hand on the stone, when the branch gave way above her. Not the one she was studying, but a larger one, unbalanced by 3 days of accumulated ice, and came down with the specific velocity and indifference of a thing that has been waiting for precisely this moment. She heard him before she felt the impact of his hand at her shoulder, pulling her back and to the left with enough force that she stepped into the frozen grass and went down on one knee. The branch landed across the place she had been standing, and the sound of it was shocking in the cold air. She looked up from the ground. He was standing over her, his coat open, his face entirely without expression, and his hand was still at her shoulder, though she was already upright. "Are you hurt?" he said. It was not quite a question. "No," she said. He released her and stepped back. And something about the sharpness with which he did both things told her that he had not expected to find her there, or to find his hand where it had landed, or to feel what it had apparently felt. He was looking at the fallen branch with the attention of a man reviewing an argument he had made poorly. "You should not walk here alone," he said. "The estate is mine," she said. "I will walk where I choose." He looked at her. He had the eyes of someone who has been responsible for things long enough that the responsibility has settled into the bone of the face. They were a dark gray, the color of clouds before snow, and there was no coldness in them exactly, only a great deal of distance. "The upper path is iced from the mill race runoff," he said. "Go around the kitchen garden or go back inside, not the upper path." A pause, and then very quietly, "Please." The last word cost him something. She did not know what. She went around the kitchen garden. That afternoon she returned to the library to find him gone, the estate books closed and squared on the desk, and in their place a folded note in a hand she did not recognize at first, until she understood it was his. It read, "The mill race has been blocked since November. I will have it cleared." His name below. 3 letters. She folded the note and put it in her pocket, and did not take it out again. But she was aware of it for the rest of the day in the way one is aware of something warm placed near something cold. She thought of 3 words and a name, and of the quality of a man's face when he says please, and means something more than please. And she told herself firmly that she was performing arithmetic on a very small sample of data. In the evening, Agnes appeared in the kitchen doorway with her wary eyes and her capable hands, and a look that said she had been saving something for the right moment. "He has not," Agnes said carefully. taken any interest in the interior of this house since the previous Duchess died. 3 years and 2 months. He comes for the books and he goes." "Agnes," Cecily said, "I am simply telling you what I have observed. You should not tell me things about the Duke of Ashcroft." Agnes looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman who has decided that the ceiling is neutral. "And yet," she said, and returned to the kitchen. Cecily sat at the library table for a long time after that, with the estate books open before her, and the note in her pocket, and the orchard quiet outside the window. She was doing the arithmetic Agnes had intended her to do. She did not know what to make of the sum. On the 9th day, before the frost had lifted, she went to the kitchen garden. Old Mr. Watts had been the Grange's groundskeeper for 40 years, and was now nearly blind, with the clouded eyes of a man whose world has slowly narrowed to the distances he can touch. He had been managing the kitchen garden through last season by memory and by feel. And what he had managed was, under the circumstances, remarkable. The rows were uneven, and the winter herbs were choked with dead matter, but they were alive. The rosemary was alive. The thyme had spread past its borders in the direction of the leeks, which had survived, and the bay tree at the southern corner was entirely sound. She worked beside him for 2 hours, clearing the dead growth and turning the soil where it had begun to compact, and talking about each plant in the way he needed to be talked to, giving him information he could hold in his hands, telling him where the rosemary bush was in relation to his right elbow, describing what she saw so that his memory could translate it into the ground he knew. He was grateful without being plaintive, which she respected. He told her about each bed with the precise authority of a man whose relationship with the land had only deepened as his sight had dimmed. And she listened in the particular way of someone who understands that being listened to is itself a form of care. They worked in the companionable silence of people doing a necessary task and finding no reason to discuss that it needed doing. She did not know she was being watched until she was already back inside. Agnes told her that evening in the way Agnes told her things. "His Grace came round by the kitchen garden path this morning," she said. "He stood at the corner of the house for rather a long time." A pause. "He did not come in." Cecily looked at Agnes and did not ask how long rather a long time was, or what direction he had been facing, or whether his face had changed while he stood there. She asked none of these things, and the asking lived in the silence between them, like something visible. The dinner was a week before Christmas. Lady Harriet had organized it as if it were her own house, which is to say she had organized it with 32 guests and a clear architectural purpose. Lydia Pemberton arrived on the arm of her mother, in the primrose silk that had been much admired in 2 counties, and positioned herself in the drawing room with the settled permanence of a woman who has been told the room is hers and believes the telling. Cecily wore the gray silk, which was her best, and which she was aware, with the clear-eyed economic reckoning of a woman who has learned to account for these things, was outmatched by the room. She stood near the fireplace and held her glass, and was, for the most part, not addressed. It was during the dinner's second course that Lady Harriet, presiding at Edmund's right hand with the ease of long practice, said to Mrs. Pemberton, in the carrying voice she had used in the drawing-room that first morning, the voice that understood the acoustics of rooms it intended to inhabit, that one did feel for poor Silas. In the end, leaving the Grange to someone so entirely unprepared for the responsibility. "The cottage girl means well, I am sure," she said. "Competence is not a matter of intention." The table heard it. Cecily heard it. She set her fork down carefully and looked at the centerpiece. A spray of hothouse roses brought in from Ashcroft, the color of the wallpaper she had been planning to replace in the yellow guest room. She did not look at Edmund. She did not need to look at him to know that he had heard it. She could feel, across the table's width, the quality of the stillness that came over him. A stillness distinct from his ordinary stillness. One that had a direction. The way weather has a direction before it arrives. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that she did not know, and that not knowing was its own form of difficulty. She drank her water. She ate the third course. She said good evening to each guest at her end of the table with the composed dignity of a woman who has practiced composure in harder rooms than this, and she did not give Lady Harriet the satisfaction of her eyes. The ledgers were old, and whoever had kept them before Edmund had kept them badly, and the two of them spent 3 mornings in December unraveling the accounts together at the library table. He did not explain why he continued to come. She did not ask. The estate books needed to be accurate, and the silence between them across the table was of the kind that has stopped being uncomfortable because too many mornings have passed inside it. It was the silence of people who have arrived, without negotiating it, at a working ease. She had learned by then the particular grammar of his presence. He arrived at 9. He took the chair to the left of the window. He drank his tea without speaking for the first quarter hour. He corrected figures by crossing them out and writing alongside, never above, and his handwriting was very even and very black and gave nothing away. When he spoke, it was about the land, drainage, timber, winter fodder, the mill race, the state of the South Gate. He never spoke about anything that was not the estate, except once, and that was the morning he said, without looking up from the column of figures before him, "You spoke to Watts yesterday about the bay tree. He was worried about the frost reaching the roots," she said. "It will not," he said. "That tree is older than either of us." A pause, and then his voice, quieter. "He told my son about it. James." Another pause, fractionally longer than the first. He liked hearing about it. She did not ask about James. She waited. He reached into his coat and took out the miniature without, she thought, meaning to. He set it on the table between them as a man sets down a weight he has been carrying without noticing. It was small, the case worn silver at the hinge and the edges, and the portrait inside showed a young woman with fair hair and a composed expression that spoke of a character she would never now know. "Charlotte," he said, "my wife. She died 3 years ago. Childbed." "I'm sorry," Cecily said. "James was early." His voice was level. "I was in Derbyshire. The roads were bad." The last 2 sentences carried the whole of it, the way a short sentence sometimes carries a room's worth of silence. She looked at the miniature, and not at him, because looking at him in this moment would be a liberty she had not been granted. She understood without being told that this was a thing he had not said to many people, perhaps to no one, and the understanding settled over her with the weight of something she had not asked to carry, but was going to carry regardless. She would have liked this house, he said after a time. She preferred small things to large ones. He picked the miniature up and returned it to his breast pocket. He turned his eyes back to the ledger, and the conversation closed, gently and without ceremony, like a door quietly shut. They did not speak of it again that morning. If you have followed Cecily this far, you have arrived at the hinge of her story. The next pages will cost everyone something. Stay with her. He came to the kitchen garden that afternoon and did not say why he was there, only walked beside her along the dormant beds while she described to Mr. Watts where the new drainage would be laid. He fell into step with the ease of a man who has stopped pretending he is somewhere else. At one point she reached past him for the garden knife she had left on the wall, and the back of her hand grazed his coat. And she steadied herself on the stone and did not look at him. And he did not look at her. And the moment passed in the specific way that moments pass when they have been noted by both parties and agreed, by silent contract not to examine," he said, walking back to the house. "James has not been sleeping. Agnes mentioned you told him the story of the bay tree." "Agnes is very thorough," Cecily said. Something shifted in his face. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression that precedes a smile in a face that had perhaps forgotten the sequence, the particular arrangement of the muscles around the eyes and mouth that means something has arrived before the rest of the face has finished deciding whether to receive it. "She is," he said. She looked ahead at the kitchen door and felt the warmth of it in her chest. The way one feels warmth from a fire before one is close enough for it to be rational. She was in very serious trouble. She had known it since the branch fell in the orchard. She had known it since the note in his handwriting that said only 3 words and his name. She had known it, perhaps, from the moment on the front steps when he had looked at her with that careful, not contempt attention, and looked away first. She had not known what to do with the knowing, and she still did not, and the dark she was walking toward was darker than she had accounted for. The night of Lady Harriet's second gathering at the Grange, Agnes appeared at Cecily's elbow as she stood near the south window of the drawing-room, quiet as always, and said without preamble, "I thought you should know, Miss Merton, that Mrs. Pemberton was heard in the corridor not 20 minutes ago, telling Mrs. Ashby that the cottage girl had better enjoy her season here while it lasted." Cecily held her glass and did not move. "Thank you, Agnes," she said. Agnes withdrew in the way she withdrew from things she had reported, completely and at once. She had heard it said 3 times now, in 3 different rooms, by 3 different mouths. She understood that it had been designed to be heard. She also understood, with the same clear-eyed accounting she brought to everything, that it was very probably about to get worse. It did. She was still standing near the south window, still and composed, when Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried across the room, saying with the pleasant confidence of one delivering confirmed intelligence that the announcement was expected before the new year. She held her glass and did not move. She had not, she told herself carefully, expected anything. She had no cause to expect anything. He was a duke with an estate and a son and a dead wife he carried in his breast pocket, and she was the woman who had arrived to claim a cottage and found herself in the wrong story entirely. She had no claim on what she had imagined she heard in 3 weeks of mornings at a library table. None of it had been offered. None of it had been named. Lady Harriet rose at the table's end and called for quiet with the assurance of a woman for whom silence arrives on command. She held up a letter. It was old. Cecily could see that much from where she stood. The paper yellowed, the fold marks deep. Lady Harriet explained it clearly and without hurry to the assembled room. There was a letter, written 5 years prior, in which Edmund had communicated to the late Lord Pemberton his intention to discuss a formal arrangement for Lydia at such time as Edmund's period of mourning had concluded. Lady Harriet had understood this to be a commitment, if an informal one. Now, with mourning long past and the new year approaching, the proper moment had come. Edmund was at the fireplace. His face was, as always, still. He looked at the letter in his mother's hands, and he did not contradict her. He looked at Cecily, once, across the length of the room. She was already setting her glass down. She walked to Agnes in the hallway and said, in a voice she was proud of for its evenness, "Will you help me begin my trunk?" Agnes looked at her. "Miss Merton," she said, "it is 10 o'clock at night." "In the morning, then," Cecily said. "First thing." She went up to the east bedroom and sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark, and did not light the candle. She sat there for a long time. The house was quiet around her, quiet in the way it was always quiet. with the cold in the stone and the sound of the wind against the west-facing glass. She had been in this room 3 weeks. She had learned the quality of its silence, the way the floorboard by the wardrobe creaked, the way the light moved across the ceiling in the early morning when the frost lay heavy on the east-facing fields. She knew which stair groaned. She knew the smell of the kitchen passage when Agnes had been baking, and the particular quality of the light in the library at 4 o'clock on a clear afternoon, and the sound the apple trees made in the upper orchard when the wind came down from the north. She had done something she had not meant to do. She had let the house become hers, in the way houses become yours, not through deeds or solicitors, but through the accumulation of mornings inside them. And she had let herself believe, in the specific irrational way that people believe things they cannot afford to believe, that it might stay that way. He had not defended her. He had stood at the fireplace and looked at the letter and said nothing, and she understood what nothing meant. She understood it the way one understands the weather, not with the mind, but with the whole surface of the body. She found the copy of Gilbert White's Selborne in the bottom of her valise, where it had been since Bath. Her great-uncle had written her name on the flyleaf in his irregular hand, and below it a single line. The thing that persists is the thing that earns its place. She sat with it in the dark for a long time. In the morning, she rose at 6 and went to the kitchen garden, because it was hers, and it was 6 o'clock and Mr. Watts would need to know that the drainage work had been confirmed for the new year, regardless of who was at the Grange to see to it. She told him, methodically, everything she had arranged. She left him her notes, transcribed in large, clear letters he could hold close enough to read if the morning light was right. She was thorough. She had always been thorough. She told herself this was sufficient. She was back inside and halfway up the main stair when she heard the front door. He had come from the house on foot, without his coat, which told her that he had not planned the distance between the intention and the act. He came through the entrance hall at the pace of a man who has decided something and is moving before the decision can be revisited. And she turned on the stairs and looked at him and kept her hands still at her sides, because she had been managing her hands since Bath, and she was not going to stop now. "You are leaving," he said. "Your Grace," she said. "No." He stopped at the foot of the stair. His face had a quality she had not seen before, something that lived below the stone, something the stone had been covering for a very long time. Not that. She waited. "I have known what that letter was since the night she produced it," he said. "I wrote it in the year after Charlotte died. I was trying to do what was expected of me. I have done what was expected of me for 3 years, and it has not cost me what last night cost me." He looked at her with the careful attention that was no longer distant, that had crossed the distance between them, and was now simply careful, simply present. "I did not expect you." She began to say something, and he shook his head. "Come downstairs," he said. It was a command. It was also a question. The particular grammar of a man who has spent 3 years issuing commands as a form of protection and has just learned that there is a difference between protection and presence. "The guests have not yet departed." She came downstairs. She did not know what he had planned, or whether he had planned anything. She knew only that he had walked across the gravel on a December morning without his coat, and she was filing that alongside the note in his handwriting and the branch in the orchard and the quality of his face when he said James liked hearing about the bay tree in the ledger of things she had decided not to examine, which was becoming a very full ledger. The drawing room was still occupied. Lady Harriet had not yet completed her departure. She was there with her mantle half-fastened and Lydia Pemberton beside her. And Mrs. Pemberton beyond. And 20 guests who had been taking their leave and had now collectively paused in the way-room's pause when the atmosphere changes. And everyone present knows it. Edmund walked into the drawing room. Cecily came behind him and stopped at the threshold. He crossed the room to his mother and took the letter from her hand and said, "This was written in grief. It carries no formal obligation. I should have said so last night." "Lydia has been expecting this arrangement," Lady Harriet said. "Miss Pemberton deserves a man who chooses her," he said, "not a man performing a duty." He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet held the way. Quiet holds in rooms that know something is about to happen. Then he turned, and he looked at Cecily in the doorway, and he crossed the room toward her with the 3 deliberate strides of a man who has made up his mind. And he said, in the level voice the room would hear, "Miss Merton is mistress here. She will be my wife." 10 words. There was a moment of absolute suspension in the drawing room, the kind that follows a stone thrown into still water before the surface has processed what has happened, before the rings begin to spread. Lady Harriet's face did not collapse all at once. It was a rearrangement, a rapid private recalculation, and something else at the end of the recalculation that was not quite chagrin but was in its family. She looked at her son, and she looked at Cecily, and she looked at the room. And the room was looking back at her with the polite, merciless attention of witnesses, and she said, after a moment, "Edmund." And then she stopped. She had said his name and found nothing sufficient behind it. Lydia Pemberton looked at Cecily with an expression more honest than most, and nodded once, very slightly, and went to find her mother's cloak. Mr. Holt materialized from beside the window, which is where Mr. Holt tended to be in moments that required him, with his folio under his arm and the expression of a man who had learned to carry the right documents. "Your Grace," he said, "I can have the amended settlement drawn by the new year, if that is agreeable." Edmund looked at Cecily. She was aware of the room and the watching and the December light through the tall windows and the sound of a log settling in the grate. She was aware of his hand at his side, not touching her, waiting. "It is agreeable," she said. He did not touch her then. He stood beside her and faced the room with her, which was a different thing, and a larger thing than touching. And the witnesses present felt the difference. The way one feels a change in weather before the weather arrives. The spring came late to Derbyshire that year, but when it came thoroughly. By March, the kitchen garden at Thornfield Grange was something that Mr. Watts could walk through with his hands at his sides instead of outstretched before him, because the paths had been relaid in autumn in the order he had always known them, and the rosemary and the thyme were in their correct positions relative to his right elbow, and the bay tree at the south corner was, as Edmund had promised on that cold morning in December, entirely untroubled by the frost. James had taken to spending his mornings in the garden with Mr. Watts, which no one had arranged and everyone had noticed. He was a quiet child, 4 years old now, with his father's gray eyes and the habit of standing very still to observe things, a beetle crossing a stone, a sparrow at the garden wall, in the patient way of a person who expects that if he is still enough, the thing will show him what it actually is. He had told Cecily in February, very solemnly, that the bay tree was older than both of them put together. She had said that was quite right, and he had nodded with the satisfaction of a person confirming information he had already established through independent research. She found Edmund in the library one afternoon in April, which was where he most often was, with the window open to the orchard and the accounts spread before him. Though he was not looking at the accounts. He was looking at the orchard wall. where the gap in the mortar had been repaired over the winter, and the fallen branch had been cleared away and stacked for wood. He had the miniature in his hand. He had carried it in his breast pocket every day for 3 years, through every morning at the library table, and every walk through the Grange's grounds, and every dinner he had attended in the county. And then, on a morning in January, he had taken it from his pocket and carried it upstairs to the nursery, to the shelf above the small fireplace, where James could see it from his bed, and he had not put it back in his pocket. He was holding it now as a man holds a thing he is preparing to return to its proper place. She came to stand beside him at the window, and he held the miniature out toward her without a word, and she took it carefully from him and looked at the portrait inside, at the fair-haired young woman with the composed expression. "She would have liked the garden," Cecily said. "I believe she would have fought you for it," he said. She looked up. His face had the expression it occasionally had now, the one that had been learning to live beside the stone rather than beneath it, something that was learning, steadily and without announcement, to be warmth. She handed the miniature back to him. He looked at it for a moment longer, and then set it on the window ledge, in the light, where it rested in a shaft of April sun with the quiet permanence of an object that has found its place. She had the Selborne in her hand, as she often had it now that the house was hers, and she could leave her books where she liked. She opened it to the fly-leaf, where her great-uncle's handwriting was fading to the color of the page around it. "The thing that persists is the thing that earns its place." She had not understood it the first time she read it in the dark. She had a better reading of it now. Outside the window, James had found a branch fallen from the nearest apple tree and was examining it with the patience of a naturalist. Mr. Watts stood beside him, his hands easy at his sides, describing something that made the boy nod 3 times in quick succession. Edmund watched them for a moment. Then he looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing that needed saying that was not already in the room, already in the light on the window ledge, and the open book in her hands, and the sound of a child's voice in the garden asking questions about old wood. The light was the long light of April, laying itself across the floorboards as it had laid itself across these particular floorboards every April for a great many years before either of them came to stand in it. The miniature caught a portion of it and held it there, small and bright, and no longer a weight. The bay tree at the south corner of the garden was green. The house was warm. Thank you for staying with Cecily until the end of her story. If this was the kind of quiet you needed tonight, we would love to know which moment you will carry with you.